So I gave you a 2-page document. In case you haven't seen, there is another page on the other side. It's really just to give you an overview of what we're talking about when we, in the broader sense, when we're saying, when we want to cover the whole thing that we're going to try to cover tonight. I was making a joke earlier. I think the topic that was chosen for me by my colleagues over here is just, it's a little bit complicated because they thought they would have fun hear me struggle with my English because I'm French and also with the topic. So I'm sure they're looking forward for the making fun of me. All right, so now the idea really is, when you think about it, so you have the spatial. So we'll go. You have part 1 on the page, and then you have part 2 on the other side. So we will cover the first part, which is the page where we have, which starts by saying we are matter. So the way to read the documents for yourself when you're done, we're not going to read it tonight. I just want you to have basically what I'm saying here on paper, and then you do whatever you want. But we will not cover page 2. That would be another complete different topic. But the idea, if you look at, you have 2 lines, 2 columns. On the left side, we have the arguments you are presenting. On the other one, you have the answer. It's like it's set up as a dialogue, and the arrows help you figure out what flows. All right. So, because really, when you think about arguing for the existence of God, there is a few arguments that we know, and you have them on your page 2. But one of them, which is the topic that I've been asked to speak about tonight, is the concept of necessity. The idea of necessity means that for some things to be possible, some things are required. All right. So for me to be able to be alive, I had to have parents. I couldn't become myself without having parents. So it's also somehow what we call, in an extensive way, the principle of causality. Every effect has to have a cause. If you have a broken leg, something happened to you. It didn't break itself. So it's the idea of necessity or causality. And the idea really says that what we are seeing as Christians is that for everything to be possible, there has to be a reason, right? So, and that some reason, you have different kinds of causes or reasons, and every cause are themselves an effect. So in idea, let's think this way, I don't know. Maybe you step on your foot and you have pain. So the reason why you have pain is because I stepped on your foot. I stepped on your foot because I was doing something on my phone. And then I can go all the way back, and this is a chain of events. Step on your foot, you have pain. Why? Because I stepped on your foot. Why did I step on your foot? Because I was watching on my phone. Why was I watching on my phone? Because I was texting back. Why did I text back someone? Because somebody texted me. Why did they text me? Because they needed something. Why did they need something? Because they didn't have it, right? So that's the idea. That's a chain of events. Okay, but at some point, something needs to start as the first cause, which is necessary, right, for us to exist. And that's what we're saying as God is either we say the first cause or he's there by necessity. I told you, they asked me to cover something that's that easily. But the idea is, when you look at this here on your paper, you realize that there is a few things. So when we talk about necessity, we're saying the meaning that the world, as we know it, could not have been here without God. That's what we're saying. All right? So if you have basic science, and you know that one of the first things that we learn in physics, or in science in the broader sense, is that out of nothing comes nothing. That's one of the principles. The other one is we know that matter, everything that surrounds us, which is material in the physical sense, and that matter was not eternal. It had a beginning at some point. And we know that for so many reasons, but I don't have the time, of course, to speak about this, but we know that for a fact. Now, if the matter is not eternal, then the universe, which is made of matter, is not eternal itself. And then if it is not eternal, it had to have a cause. All right? But if that cause came up, as some people are saying, God is within the universe. He's part of the universe. Well, that does not address the answer in the way we're thinking about it, because if God is in the universe, then he could not be the origin of the universe, and we're still hanging with the same question. Where did it come from, right? So when we speak about what we say necessity or causality in philosophy, which is not a Christian argument, it's really a philosophical principle that you will find in a Christian environment or in a non-Christian environment. And then we always think this way, as there has to be a first cause, otherwise we will never get to where we are today. Because remember what I said about the food, the pain, and then I step in the food, the texture. If I go on and on and on and go in the back, I will never be able to go to the origin if there is no origin, right? Can I go, if there is a complete, indefinite, infinite chain of events, can I go to the origin? Can I? Well, if I cannot go to the origin, that means I couldn't go to today, because there is an infinite number of events. So for today to exist, even for us to be there, we have a specific day today. We have a specific time in the day. We were able to make it at 8 o'clock tonight, or 7 because we arrived earlier. It's because every hour ends. We can, the time, then we can meet at a certain time because we get there at some point. Now, if there is an infinite number of seconds between any hour, if it's 12 o'clock, I'm telling you I'm going to meet you at 1 o'clock, I will never meet you if there is an infinite number of seconds between 12 and 1. It's the same idea, right? So bear with me. We're gonna go there. So what we're saying here, really, I'd like to for you to look at this with me, if it works. Does it? Yes. So when you don't believe in God, which is the definition of atheism, basically you have some implications, and some of them I like to speak tonight. And the idea is that the world, let me put it differently, but you don't need to believe in God to believe in reason. You don't need to believe in God to believe in meaning. You don't need to believe in God to believe in ethics. But you need to believe in God to explain why we have those things. That's the difference. So I don't have to explain. If you ask anybody in the street, are you a Christian or a believer? No, I'm not. You believe that there is a meaning in life? Yes, even though I don't know what it is for my life, I know that I have to have some meaning, because if life is meaningless, then we cannot live this life. There is no, that's the idea of why some people take their life, because they found the life to be meaningless. And if all of us would find life meaningless, we will end up in the same way. So do you think people that don't believe in God believe in a reasoning process? Yes, they do, because they believe they have a cognitive capacity that allows them to learn and speak and argue and defend their viewpoints. So nobody argues. You don't have to be a Christian to believe that you have those things, but you have to believe in God for those things to make any sense. Because just as an idea, to give you a broad idea, but that you'll see that in the arguments in the paper that I've given you. But the idea is, if God does not exist, the only alternative explanation for now is evolution. 3.5 billion of years for life to be able to process itself in a way to come to what we are today. There is more with the universe. It's maybe 11, 13, 15 billion years. There is different figures. But the idea is, the only alternative to God is everything happened by chance, right? So we'll talk about this. There is a nice quote that you have in your paper from C.S. Lewis that I really like, because he explained it well. But the idea is like, if we are pure chance and randomness for billions of years, there is no intelligence behind the evolutionary process, then my capacity to reason is a byproduct of evolution. It's not the actual product of it. There is no reason for me to have a reason. It just happened to be this way. But if it's so random, and if it's the product of pure chance, how can I defend it to be reliable? Because it is not meant to be reliable. It is meant to be a byproduct of something that actually was never meant to be. So you see, for me to argue against God, I have to use my reasoning. But for me to be actually using my reasoning, I have to argue against God. I have to base my faith in some kind of origin for my reasoning to be reliable. So that's the circular reasoning we're talking about. Is that I need God to argue against God. That's the idea. I need God to make sense of my reasoning process. Therefore, I need God to argue against Him. And that's what we're trying to say. Okay? So when you look at this, if you don't believe in God, then you have, number one, you're left with materialism. So when we say materialism, we're not using the word in terms of financial materialism. I can get things, my belongings. But we're saying that we're just left with matter. There is nothing more. Like everything we believe to be human is actually a byproduct of the functioning of the body. My thoughts are actually not real thoughts. They are connection of synapses. My emotions are only chemicals in my body. And there is nothing outside of it. Like I cannot be more than what I have materially. That's one thing we will cover quickly. And then the other one is, as I just said, if you have no God, then you're left with actually no explanation for a reason. And number 3, you have no meaning in life. The reason why we have no meaning in life is because we don't come from anywhere. We're not going anywhere. There is no plan. And if there is no plan, then there is no particular reason why I'm here. And so my life is really meaningless in that sense. And you see that in the 20th century where atheistic philosophies took over nations, like we see in the communist era, maybe in China or in Russia, and also through fascism during the Nazi Germany. And they used a lot of things that we feel today are very wrong because we have this Judeo-Christian ethics we will talk about in a minute. Like the concept of eugenism, which is you're killing anybody who's not fit, right? That's why we only know maybe Nazi Germany to have killed the Jews, but that's not the only people they killed. They killed the handicapped, they killed the Down syndrome children, because they felt that they were not fit to be alive. And why? It's because life is meaningless. And if I give myself a purpose, which is to create a perfect race of people, which becomes my purpose, then I'm working on it. And because the other ones are meaningless, they don't have any meaning as human beings, it comes from the idea of if we have no God, there is no purpose. I was not created. I was not meant to be. I'm just a byproduct of an evolutionary process. And the last one is I have no explanation for ethics. And that's something also we need to understand because everybody believes in some kind of right and wrong. I have never met anybody who does not believe some kind of, could be different. We could disagree on what is right and what is wrong, but everybody has a sense of ethics. Now, it's interesting, like, okay, most of us are, I think, Westerners in our culture in this room. So when you look at the other culture that you discover, some things are shocking, right? We're looking at the world, we see differently, and we think and all of a sudden it's like, what they're doing is wrong, Like, for example, even within the Western world, like in Europe and America, for example, the issue of death penalty, there is a big difference in the cultures. It is acceptable in America, and it would never be acceptable. It's not anymore acceptable in Europe. So the European, in the way, they're considering themselves as superior in that matter because we know better than Americans. They obviously shouldn't do that because it's not something that you do, right? It's not proper to do. And when you look at other cultures, if you go to some Arabic cultures, they cut the hands of those who steal. And we're saying, well, that's inhuman. It is interesting because I'm looking for my culture where we don't do that. I'm looking at your culture and I'm saying this is wrong. But how can I say that? Because I'm actually assuming something that he's also assuming, which is my culture is right, your culture is wrong. And he's saying, no, my culture is right and your culture is wrong. Now, if there is no God, if there is no, just like in a game or in a match, or if there is no referee, and who's right and who's wrong if there are no rules. Now, if you play a game of some kind, you will follow the rules and you accept at the outset of the game that there are rules and you have to be followed, right? Because we believe in some kind of authority in the rules of the game. It's the same thing here. If there is no God, there is nobody beyond you and I, right? Let's say we are just a bunch of people. We came here tonight to discuss ethics and what is right and what is wrong. And if we are all human beings and none of us is higher than the other one, then what will be the way for us or for me to impose my culture or my ethics on you? What are my options? I don't have an inherent authority to impose on you what I believe to be right and wrong, do I? I'm just one of the other guys in the room. So my only option is force or intelligence or diplomacy maybe or some kind of bribery or so you see, so the point is if there is no transcendent being, that's what we call it, above us, then there is no reason why I should accept anybody's ethics. And if God does not exist, then on what ground am I saying that I cannot kill someone for my own benefits? Because it actually is a good thing. Well, you killed someone, but the results are good. I was poor, he was rich, I killed him, I took $1 million, I'm rich. How can that be wrong? My life today is much better than it was 2 days ago. So that is a good thing. And in my world, who are you, to disagree with me? If there is no God beyond you and I, if there is no God transcending us, then there is no ground for ethics. Number one, I cannot agree with you on ethics because there is no referee, let's put it this way. And number two, nobody can impose the same ethics on everyone unless we use other kind of cunning ways. All right? So this is what we want to talk tonight. Okay? So it's a lot, so we obviously won't cover everything. But the idea is that if you reverse that argument, it actually saying with God, which is what we're talking about, the necessity of God, we actually have all of the things that we need. Number one, we have not just material people, we have more than that. Number two, I do have an explanation for it because my brain was designed to think, right? Does not always work, or it does not always work properly, but it was designed. And then I do have a meaning in life. Yes, I'm here for a purpose. And it's funny because like every human, whether they're Christian or not, they believe in something or not, they are looking for a meaning, But the Bible is interesting because the Bible actually speaks a lot about meaning. God says, I have plans for you. He speaks about this life and the life after with him. So God understands because he created us our need for meaning. So he actually feeds that need by answering it and giving us a purpose, and which you don't have. I don't know how familiar you are with philosophy, but it is very interesting. The only philosophy that actually concluded about that, the atheistic philosophy, it's I don't know if you're familiar with the European philosophers, but have you ever heard of existentialism? Well, the idea is, since there is no God, life is meaningless. That's the premise number one. And I think this is the most intelligent philosophy without God. Like if you have to conclude that life is meaningless. But what is funny is, and there are two famous French philosophers that really developed that thought. And it's interesting in both, in a little bit different way, but they both try to answer the problem because they are saying, yes, we are atheists. Yes, it necessarily means that there is no meaning in life. But they're also saying that we won't be able to sell that story. Because everybody wants to know or believe that there is no God, because there is no accountability. But nobody wants to believe the consequences. Which means that if you tell me there is no God, you give me freedom. Now, if you push me all the way by saying there is no meaning, then you take away my freedom. Because now it's useless. Because freedom is not even something that I want. Because it is meaning. It is a way of understanding life. So the way they did it, and it's Albert Camus and Jean-Paul Sartre, two French philosophers, they said, well, it's easy. You have to create your own meaning. And so they were very popular in the 50s and 60s in France. And it is interesting. So one of them, they were both, especially Jean-Paul Sartre, but he was like considered on the left side of politics. And he wanted to start a revolution. Like he wanted to, because he says like, revolution is the meaning of our lives. So we need to change things. We need to change society. And it is very interesting because when you read those philosophies, you realize how much it is contradictory to itself, but also how much it belongs to the Christian thinking. Because, if you believe that the revolution is necessary, it's because you're not happy with society. You're not happy with society because you have an idea what society should be. And where did they get that from? And the other idea also is that if life is really meaningless, and that's the way evolution meant for us to be, then why is everybody trying to find a meaning in their life? Like it doesn't compute. We are not designed. We are a byproduct of evolution. There is no meaning in our life. And at some reason, at some point, meaning became the center of our life. I want to be accepted. I want to mean something. I want to be, all these things that we're trying to be as people, where I want to be loved. All these things, because otherwise my life is meaningless. When did that happen in the process of evolution? So you see how on one way there shouldn't be any meaning because life is meaningless. On the other hand, you have 7 billion people on the earth that are craving for meaning in their lives. That's why the philosophy is self-contradictory, because they are claiming that there is no meaning, but you have to find your own. And you have to find your own because you're craving for it. And we're saying the reason why we're craving for meaning is because we were meant to have meaning, because we've been designed and created by God. So the meaning, and also for ethics, I can disagree with God if I want to, but at the end there is an ethics. There is right and wrong, and I cannot impose it on you, but God can. And what makes ethics universal, imposed on all of us, and obviously even an atheist would agree with us by saying, if God really exists, do you think He can impose Himself as the super moral being? And of course, they would say in theory, let's accept that God exists. They would accept it because God would be that being. He would be the creator, and being the creator, He could do that. But so these are the things that we want to talk about quickly, right? Are you there? Yeah. All right. All right. It's good. Okay. So look at your paper, maybe the page number 1, and. Ooh. All right. Are we okay over here? Good? All right. So the idea is, number 1, I'm going to go quickly with this one, and then you have the quote on the screen over here. That's really G.K. Chesterton, for those who don't know him. Number 1, he's my favorite author of all the authors I've ever read. And he's a Catholic apologist. End of 19th century, and he died in 1936, so not so long ago. And it's by reading one of his books that C.S. Lewis got converted. So he has a way of explaining things in one paragraph that actually would summarize, a whole semester of classes, and he's very good at it. But he's saying, so as an explanation of the world, materialism has a sort of insane simplicity. It has just the quality of the madman's argument. We have at once a sense of it covering everything and the sense of leaving everything out. The idea is that if God does not exist, life is very simple. We just matter. There's nothing else but that. But on the other hand, by explaining everything by that simplicity, you're actually taking everything. Like if you're telling me my life is meaningless, you're actually killing the meaning of my life. So it's not that simple. That's what he's trying to say. Contemplate some able and sincere materialists, as for instance, Mr. McCabe. It's one of the guys that he was arguing with when he was alive. And you will have exactly the unique sensation. He understands everything. So he's got a complete philosophy of life. And everything does not seem worth understanding. Like once you explain to me the whole thing, you actually killed my meaning. Because if you look at me in the eyes by saying, you know what, you're completely worthless. Well, your explanation, even though it's simple, is not... I'm sorry. I don't want to pursue that. It's like you're killing everything for me, and then he explains a little bit. It is not thinking of the real things of the earth, fighting people or proud mothers or the first love or fear upon the sea. The idea is it's so simple, but it does not explain the human experience. Like as I said about existentialism, the life is meaningless, but obviously, hold on, guys. You create your meaning. Oh, thank you. It's like it is simple. You conclave it intelligently with the idea of the fact that there is no God, but your explanation really takes away, sucks light out of me, and I'm not interested in what you have to say. That's why I have to fix it. And one of the French philosophers called materialism a fair weather philosophy. The idea is that it only works when everything is fine. If your life is great, you got all the money you need, your family is fine, everything goes according to plan, then it's okay to believe that there is no God, because I don't really have to think about it. It's what we call a fair weather philosophy. But now when the rubber meets the road, that's where your problem begins. It's interesting because my girlfriend and I've lived in America for the last maybe 4 years, most of it. And as outsiders, it's interesting to see how the country is a little bit changing, in many ways. There is a reaction against God, there is a reaction against Christianity. But it is interesting, everybody who is actually claiming that they want to be free from God Every time there's a tragedy, the only recourse is it's prayer. Even those who actually don't believe that's it. Because why? Because that's the only message that people will be able to receive. Now, if you want to be coherent with your thinking and you're a complete atheist, then you should go and say, I'm sorry, guys, I heard, but that's the way life is, right? The survival of the fittest. There was a shooting, 20 people died because they were not fit to survive. Any questions? No, let's move on. That should be the logical explanation for life, because there is no other explanation. But why do I have to hide my philosophy by saying we are thankful, our prayers are with the family? What prayers? If you don't believe there is a God, what prayers are you talking about? Because it's a fair weather philosophy. It only works when everything is fine. Well, now with the tragedy, I have to find my notes. Where is my God thing? I have to borrow to be coherent and to be relevant to people's life. I have to borrow from Christianity. I have to borrow from God. I have to bring him in the situation, even though I don't believe in him. Because for the first time in my life, when the rubber meets the road, I find myself in a philosophy that is completely void of meaning, of anything. And I have no message. I have nothing to say. I have no compassion to bring, because life is basically meaningless. And that's something we need to understand. So the first point that we make is that you have to understand what it means. If God, to explain it, reverse this, put it this way, like to explain the experience of humankind, there is a necessity for God, because materialism does not explain the complete experience of man. That's what we're saying. Number 2 on your paper, all right? On matter and reasons. The other thing we said is that without God, we don't have any explanation for reason. As we said, we are just a byproduct of evolution. So this is what C.S. Lewis is saying. So supposing there was no intelligence behind the universe, no creative mind. So there is no God, right? So in that case, nobody designed my brain for the purpose of thinking. So my brain is thinking, but it was not designed for it. So he goes on by saying it is merely that when the atoms inside my skull happen for physical or chemical reasons to arrange themselves in a certain way, that gives me as a byproduct the sensation I call thought. So I'm actually not intentional in my thinking. It's just a kind of a process. But you have to bear with me, because it's interesting, because when I think, I act, don't I? So if I think about murdering someone and I actually kill someone, according to the evolutionary theory, I shouldn't be held responsible. It's just a byproduct of what I'm doing as a non-created being. Right? It's a byproduct. I have these instincts. It comes from my animal background. I'm sorry, you just told me I came from an animal. It stays with me. I have the instincts of survival, and somebody hates me, I have to kill them. And that I should not be held accountable for it, because there is this byproduct, but also there is no ethics, really. It's not because the law says I shouldn't murder that I shouldn't, because there is no God. It's funny, like in our countries, especially, worldwide, it's the case when we have organized judicial systems. They are all based on Judeo-Christian philosophies, all of them. You don't murder people, you don't do that. Why? Because. All right, that should be enough. Because the law says it. But what is the profound meaning? Because life is meaningless. It's the whole idea of evolution is the survival of the fittest. So if someone gets killed because he's not up to, the standard of our understanding of what human beings should be, that should be okay. That should be completely okay. So let's move on with this one. But if so, how can I trust my own thinking to be true? That's the question. Like if whatever thought that I have happens to be some kind of chemical reactions, how do I know how can I believe that my own thinking is true? It is like upsetting a milk jug and hoping that the way it splashes itself will give you a map of London. Have you ever tried that? Take some kind of, any kind of liquid and put it on the floor and try to have that as many times as you want. Spill it until you get a map of London, or whatever city you want. He's British, that's why he says London, but if you're in Baltimore or wherever you come from, it's fine too. You will never get it. You will never get it. It is impossible. But if I can't trust my own thinking, and that's what brought him to Christianity. So if I cannot trust my own thinking, of course, I can't trust the arguments leading to atheism. And if I cannot trust my thinking, can I trust any arguments of any kind? So I can't. So obviously my arguments against God are not valid either. And therefore I have no reason to be an atheist or anything else. Unless I believe in God, I cannot believe in thought. So I can never use thought to disbelieve in God. So that's the necessity we're talking about. You understand the argument here. It's really simple. But he's saying, if my brain was not designed to think, then I cannot trust it in any ways. So as you look at your little flow here, you'll see that some people have attempted to express, by saying, well, like William Ramsay, he's a Canadian philosopher of science and also a scientist, and he says a cognitive system that generates the belief that tigers are large, cuddly pussycats, or the belief that the best way to get near something is to run away from it, will down the road get you into trouble. If your cognitive system is prone to these sort of errors, then you are not going to be around for long. So the idea is that as an evolutionary scientist, he's saying the reason why we have a reliable, and he believes that we have a reliable thinking process because we needed it. Otherwise, when you can make a difference between a cat and a tiger, you're going to be eaten. So at some point, there was a need for us to think, right? There was a need for us to think because we had to make a difference between something dangerous and something that could be a prey. So I guess if you're a mid-sized animal, you'd rather eat a cat than be eaten by a tiger. So to make a difference between the two, you had to be intelligent enough. That's how the thinking process was developed by the evolutionary process, which actually, when you pause for a minute, you just wonder, it's interesting. I'm not a scientist at all. Obviously my only connection to science is philosophy of science. So I don't understand the concept, but I can ask questions, and as many of you know, I'm surrounded by scientists in my family. So I did have my fair of very interesting conversations. But the idea is every time I hear answers or I read about evolution, there is always an intention behind it. There is some kind of intelligence. It's like think about anything we had that required a long process of evolution, the capacity to see, right? Before any eyes were there, billions of years ago, there were no eyes. But before we actually design an eye, will require hundreds and thousands, maybe millions of years to develop, right? There is no eye. Between the time there is no eye and between there is an eye, there are millions of years of evolutionary process. But number one, you have to understand the concept and the principle of seeing, right? For me to actually develop an eye, I have to understand the concepts of the benefit I would get from seeing. So the idea of seeing was existing before the eye. That does not make any sense. Because for me to actually equip someone with an eye is because I actually think that he's going to need to see, and for him to see, he's going to get an eye. This is what I'm going to do. It's going to take me a minute. So it's a lot of thinking for a completely void of personality process. Supposedly, the evolutionary process is completely void of intelligence and personality. So you see how the trouble is. It's like every time you interact with evolution in some ways, we always find yourself with the only logical explanation is actually, it's funny for me, and as I said, in my family I have a few scientists, and my cousin is an astrophysicist, and it's interesting because when we had conversation, I haven't seen him in a long time, but when we had conversation, it was always, the answer was always full of intelligence, always full of there is a need, there is a thinking behind it, there is a process, there is a design. And you've heard, if you study evolution, you've heard about natural selection. The concept of natural selection is actually contradictory to any kind of evolutionary process. Because anything that is useless will have to be removed. But if it's removed, then there is no evolutionary process. So if you want to have an eye when there is no eye, number one, you have to think about the concept of seeing, and I have to decide that I'm going to equip you, but not you, because not everybody has an eye. So I'm going to equip you with an eye, but not you. Like, I don't know, the starfish doesn't have an eye, so I'm not giving him one, but I'm going to give you one. So I'm going to give you an eye, and I'm going to give you two. Why? Everybody has two. I don't know, except spiders, I know. But, it's like, there is, so I'm going to give you an eye, but it's going to take me a while to develop it. So I'm going to push one way, and I'm going to have at some point to tell natural selection, no, leave that. No, but it's useless. It is. I need to remove it. It's useless. Like the tail we supposedly have, it's useless. Let's remove it. So natural selection is in charge of removing things, and somebody has to tell natural selection, remove that, but not this. Why? Because I'm designing something. It's an eye. You don't know what it is. So it has to stay for generations and generations until the eye is finished. And then when the eye is finished, it has to be connected to the brain, because I don't know why. Why do we have to do this? I could have an eye that doesn't need a brain to see. But everything is connected, which makes the process even more complicated. This is why scientists who don't want to be creationists are actually, some kind of form of intelligent design or evolutionary theist, because they realize it takes a lot of intelligence for the process to work. So that's what we're saying. So William Ramsey is arguing the reason why we have a reasoning capacity is because there is a need for us to see, to think, right? That is what he's saying. So if you look at this, the paper I gave you, so it's kind of the answer we're saying. To which we should respond. The question we raised is about the reliability of reason, to which you answer by saying that my reason produces true and false belief, which implies that it's not reliable. Why? Because if you ask William Ramsey, do you believe in God? He's going to say no, because he does not. But if I tell him I believe in God, so one of us is wrong, right? It can be both right. So I'm saying God exists, you're saying William Ramsey, you're saying that God does not exist. One of us is wrong, and one of our reasoning process does not work. So the answer is, well, the reason why evolution allowed us to believe religiously, because it actually helped us, by providing us some kind of meaning in our lives and reason to live, and we're serving some kind of God. So hold on. So because my argument was that you don't have a proof for the reliability of my reasoning. And you're answering me by saying sometimes it is reliable and sometimes it is not. Because sometimes it is reliable when I make a difference between a tiger and a cat, but it's not reliable when I think that God exists. How did you decide that? How do you know that when it is reliable and when it is not? So you see, every time you remove God, trying to explain human experience, you're always stuck with a mess. Let's put it this way. And I just added for fun over here, just a little thing that for me was, there's out of nearly 9 million species on the planet Earth. I'm saying 9 million, there could be more, there could be less. There are so many numbers, we don't really know. But why would man be only one species to have those connected faculties so important for survival? I don't get it. So the only way for us to survive was to actually have some kind of intelligence. But we are the only ones that have the capacity to think the way we. So why is it that crucial that we have it? Because 9 million different species don't have the same capacity to think. Why do we have to be so elaborate in our capacity to thinking, have abstract concept? That does not help in any way our survival. People say, yes, because we were too weak, we had to have another way of. But back in the day, we were not weak. When we were gorillas, we were not weak. Now I'm weak. So the point is, I was strong and didn't need intelligence. You give me intelligence, but you remove my strength. I don't get the point. It doesn't work. That's the idea. It's like, out of 9 million, I know, right? It just blow my mind. So out of nearly 9 million species, we know for sure that we are the only ones that we know, but we are the only ones that have this hyper-developed capacity to reason. Of course, it's the dolphin, they're intelligent. Yes, they are, because we consider them intelligent because they can communicate. But they have 200-300 sounds that they use. They are able to have empathy, which is really great, but they don't have any understanding of any abstract concept. We're not talking about the same thing. And even if they did, and you grant them and the alligators, if you want, some kind of intelligence superior to the others, that's 3 out of 9 million. So that does not make it necessary, because if intelligence was a necessity for survival, then 9 million species should be able to think, which is not the case. Now, the most ancient species that we know are the bacteria. They don't have any brain, but they have been here the longest according to the evolutionary model. So, and they're still here, right? And they have not changed at all. So they're completely fine as bacteria. They haven't changed a bit in billions of years, and they're still there. It is amazing when you think about this, all right? So let's move on a little bit. So this is what Chesterton is saying. Reason is itself a matter of faith. It is an act of faith to assert that thy thoughts have any relation to reality at all. The other point that he's making is that, okay, I can have an inner life that makes any sense to me. But for me to be able to relate to others' intelligence and also understand the world that I'm in is one of the things that actually started the scientific endeavor. People are saying, wow, we can actually relate to the world that surrounds us. So by doing this, we actually are arguing for God. So we need to move on a little bit over here. And as I said, I had this quote over here. It's Luc Ferry, French philosopher. I had to quote French philosophers. So I had to. It's you know. When materialism is in the philosophy of happiness, a fair weather philosophy. But that is the rub. When the storm breaks, is that philosophy one we can still adhere to? And the answer is obviously no. And I'm just wondering. I'm just going to take a couple more minutes, but I'd like to relate what we're saying to science. So, because we could talk about ethics, but I think you understand the point that I made earlier. We're thinking about reasoning and science because they are related. You know, many people are saying that science explains everything, and I don't know if you heard about the expression "the God of the gaps." And the idea of the God of the gaps was that back in the day, in the 16th, 17th century, we could not understand the world the way we do today, which is true. That's why we put God everywhere. Somebody who back 300 years ago had epilepsy, we thought it was a demon. Now we know it's epilepsy, so we don't have to explain it with a demon, right? So that's the idea, is the God of the gaps. We use God to explain everything we did not understand. But now it's the 21st century. We understand everything, so science explains God away. That's the idea behind. But number one, and I'd like to finish with 3 or 4 points about science and reasoning. And just to show, again, our theme is God as God is a necessary being. But if you understand what science is, science explains how things work, but it does not explain why things work. That's the first thing we need to understand. And I use that example. I don't have it. It's somewhere in the back. But if I would give you a challenge by saying, Kendall, can I borrow your phone for a second? I won't use it. I won't call anyone, but thank you. Oh. All right. Just in case a text comes up, I'm going to hold it like this. It is. All right. So if I give you this challenge, give me a year. I will come back. I will be able to explain everything about this phone. Like, I'm going to tear it apart, and I'm going to look at it. I won't do it, but I'm going to tear it apart, look at all the components. And if I really are capable when I put my heart to it, will I be able to understand everything about the phone? I will, right? So now if I come back to you after a year, it says challenge accepted, challenge done, here I am. Now I can explain to you everything, and I actually take 6 hours to explain every details, answer all your questions. Will you be convinced that I actually know what I'm talking about? Yes, right? But if I conclude by saying, therefore, the Apple company does not exist, what would you think? What would you think? That I'm a complete idiot. Because it's not because I'm explaining how things work that I can explain why they are there. I'm assuming it's there because it's just there. But there is a company behind it that designed it, worked on it, assembled it, and put it together. This complex thing that is a phone actually has an origin. There is a why, not just a how. And that's what most people don't understand, is when you're a scientist, you're answering the question how things work, but you're not answering the question why things are there. And it's the same for the universe. Yes, I can explain everything, which we don't actually. When you meet a really honest scientist, he'll tell you the more we explore, the less we understand. Because actually, and even though when we had somewhere the what they call overall all-encompassing theories that explains the all of reality. I think it's the fourth or fifth one we had in 50 years, that are completely different. And they are conflicting also when it comes down to the theory of relativity or the quantum physics. They shouldn't be working together at all. And both, funny enough, both are proven to be true so far. So what I'm saying is that, yes, science explains the hows, but not the whys. So you have not answered everything, and certainly not have explained God away. And the other thing is, like science explains the functions, but not the origin. That's what we're saying, basically. We have understanding what it is. But the other thing also is that, and that's, the idea of science being the answer for everything is what we call empiricism. Empiricism is something that was born in England in the 17th century. And the idea is the only thing you can know for sure to be true are the one you can actually experience for yourself, which what science is supposed to be. But what the people don't realize is science is not just a completely unbiased phenomena to know. Science is made by people that have personal presuppositions. And I remember that conversation, and I think for those who were in my class, apologetic, you heard it, but as I said, my cousin is an astrophysicist. My uncle, one of my uncles is a professor of mathematics in university. He also does research in mathematics. He's a very strong, atheist, very strong about his beliefs, and then it's interesting because we had this argument one day. He was saying, but you don't understand, he told me, like, there is nothing more objective than science. Like we have a theory, we test the theory, it is either proven or disproven. It cannot be more simple than that. So I don't know anything about science, but I know enough about philosophy of science. So I asked him the questions, how do you decide which theory are worth trying? He said, what do you mean? Well, obviously, some theories, according to you, are possible and some are not. You're not testing any theories, you're choosing which theories you are willing to try. And he said, yes, of course we do that. Otherwise, we would be completely testing all kinds of different theories. So you're actually sorting out the ones you already believe are possible and the ones that you already believe are not possible. So you have a principle, for example, like, when I was talking with him and my cousin says, like, he's an astrophysicist, he's interested in the origin of the universe. Could we argue maybe that one of the hypotheses would be that the universe was created by God? No, this is not scientific at all. How did you conclude that God was not a scientific explanation for the origin of the universe? By which testing or experiment did you actually arrive to that conclusion? And the answer is no, we have not tested it. So you already decided that God does not exist, and then you test the theories that are within your worldview. And that is what I'm talking about. So science is not objective. Science is based on my presuppositions. If I'm a Christian, I can bring God into the picture. If I'm not a Christian, I will exclude God from the picture. So that we are both biased as Christians and non-Christians, but at least as Christians, we know it. So if we want to summarize, really, you have everything on your paper. The whole, the page on the other side, just going further if you want to do it. But when we look at those 4 points that we made earlier, let me go back to the beginning and I'll finish with that. Yes, these are the implications of atheism. God is a necessary being because if we don't have God, we're left with those 4 problems. All right? Thank you very much.